The wind howled across the Afghan mountains like a banshee, carrying with it the promise of death. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison pulled his tactical scarf tighter around his face as he surveyed the white hell that had descended upon their position. What had started as a routine reconnaissance mission 3 days before Christmas had turned into a nightmare of survival. Morrison's team of 8 Navy SEALs had been inserted into the remote valley to gather intelligence on a high-value Taliban target, reportedly hiding in the caves above. The weather forecast had called for light snow, but Mother Nature had other plans. A massive storm system had rolled in from the north, bringing with it winds that could knock a man off his feet and snow that fell so thick it was like trying to see through cotton. "Sir, we've lost all comms with base," reported Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, his voice barely audible over the screaming wind. The team's radio operator was a 26-year-old from Texas who had never seen snow until he joined the Navy. Now he was learning firsthand why mountain warfare was considered one of the most dangerous forms of combat. Morrison nodded grimly. They had been trying to establish contact with their forward operating base for the past 6 hours, but the storm was interfering with everything electronic. Their GPS units were giving erratic readings, their night vision goggles were useless in the swirling snow, and even their cold weather gear was being pushed to its limits. The team had taken shelter in a small depression between 2 large rocks, but it offered little protection from the elements. Hypothermia was becoming a real concern, and Morrison knew they needed to find better shelter soon, or risk losing men to the cold. The irony wasn't lost on him that they might die from exposure rather than enemy bullets. Sergeant Marcus Tank Thompson, the team's heavy weapons specialist, crawled over to Morrison's position. Tank was a mountain of a man from Colorado who had grown up hunting in conditions like this, but even he looked concerned. "Commander, we need to move," he said, his breath forming crystals in the frigid air. "I know these mountains, and this storm ain't letting up anytime soon. We stay here much longer, we're gonna start losing toes and fingers." Morrison studied his men through the swirling snow. They were all experienced operators, each one a veteran of multiple deployments. But this was testing them in ways that combat rarely did. The enemy you could see and fight, but the weather was an opponent that couldn't be reasoned with or outmaneuvered. Corpsman Second Class Williams was already showing signs of the early stages of hypothermia. The medic from Minnesota was tough as nails, but his movements were becoming sluggish, and Morrison had noticed him stumbling more frequently. If Williams, who was used to cold weather, was struggling, the rest of the team wouldn't be far behind. The mission parameters had been simple: infiltrate, observe, and report. The Taliban commander they were tracking, known only as the Ghost, was believed to be using the cave system as a winter refuge. Intelligence suggested he was planning a major offensive for the spring, and command wanted to know his exact location and force strength, but intelligence had failed to account for the worst blizzard to hit the region in over a decade. The storm had blown in faster than anyone had predicted, trapping the SEALs in hostile territory, with no way to communicate with friendly forces and no clear route to extraction. "Rodriguez, try the emergency beacon again," Morrison ordered. They had been reluctant to use it earlier, knowing it would reveal their position to any enemy forces in the area, but survival was now taking precedence over operational security. Rodriguez fumbled with the device, his fingers clumsy from the cold despite his insulated gloves. "Nothing, sir. The storm's interfering with the satellite signal." Morrison made a decision that would change everything. "We move to higher ground," he announced to his team. "There's a ridgeline about 2 clicks north. If we can get above this weather, we might be able to establish comms and call for extraction." The decision was risky. Moving in these conditions would be dangerous, and they would be more exposed to both the elements and any enemy forces in the area. But staying put meant certain death from exposure. As they prepared to move out, Petty Officer Second Class Chen, their sniper and the team's youngest member at just 23, raised his hand. "Sir, I've been monitoring the valley below through my scope when the snow lets up. There's been movement down there. Could be wildlife, but the pattern suggests human activity." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. If there were enemy forces in the area, and they were detected during the move to higher ground, his team would be caught in the open, with nowhere to run and limited visibility. It would be a slaughter. "What kind of movement?" Morrison asked. Hard to tell in this weather, but I've seen at least 3 different heat signatures moving in what looks like a patrol pattern. They're staying close to the cave entrances, like they're guarding something. The pieces fell into place in Morrison's mind. The ghost wasn't just hiding in these mountains. He was actively using the storm as cover to move supplies and personnel. The SEALs had stumbled into the middle of a Taliban supply operation, and now they were trapped between the enemy below and the killing storm above. Morrison looked at his team, these warriors who had followed him into hell more times than he could count. They were cold, tired, and cut off from support. But he could see the determination in their eyes. They were SEALs, and SEALs didn't quit. "Gear up," he ordered. "We're moving to the ridge. Stay low, stay quiet, and watch each other's backs. Chen, you take point with that scope of yours. If you see anything that looks hostile, you signal immediately." As they prepared to leave their meager shelter, none of them could have imagined that their movement toward the ridge would set in motion a chain of events that would test not only their survival skills, but their very understanding of what was possible in warfare. Somewhere in the swirling white chaos above them, something was watching and waiting. The ascent to the ridge was a nightmare of ice, wind, and exhaustion. Every step was a battle against the mountain itself, as if the ancient peaks were determined to claim these intruders as tribute to their savage majesty. Morrison's team moved in single file, each man keeping visual contact with the one ahead, despite the blowing snow that reduced visibility to mere yards. Chen led the way, his sniper's instincts guiding them through the treacherous terrain. The young SEAL from California had grown up in the mountains near Lake Tahoe, but nothing had prepared him for this. The storm seemed alive, a malevolent force that pushed against them with every gust of wind and tried to blind them with walls of driving snow. Behind Chen, Tank Thompson moved with surprising grace for such a large man. His experience hunting elk in the Colorado Rockies served him well as he navigated the icy ledges and hidden crevasses. But even Tank was struggling. The altitude, combined with the extreme cold and heavy gear, was taking its toll on all of them. Rodriguez stumbled for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, his radio equipment catching on a jutting rock. Williams, despite his own deteriorating condition, moved to help him. The corpsman's medical training had taught him to recognize the signs of altitude, sickness, and severe hypothermia, and he could see both beginning to manifest in several team members. "Commander," Williams called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "We need to rest. Rodriguez is showing signs of pulmonary edema, and Johnson's core temperature is dropping fast." Morrison looked back at his men and felt a knot of dread in his stomach. Johnson, their demolitions expert, was a tough kid from Detroit who had once fought off 3 attackers in a Baghdad alley with nothing but a knife and determination. Now he was shivering uncontrollably despite his cold weather gear, and his lips were turning blue. They were still 500 meters from the ridge, but Morrison made the call. "Find shelter," he ordered. "Anything that will get us out of this wind." Chen spotted a small outcropping of rocks that formed a natural windbreak about 50 meters to their left. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The team huddled together in the small space, sharing body heat and trying to warm their extremities. As they rested, Morrison studied their situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 4 deployments. They were running out of time. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Their equipment was failing in the extreme conditions, and his men were beginning to succumb to the effects of exposure and altitude. "Sir," Chen whispered urgently, raising his scope to his eye. "Movement on the ridge above us." Morrison felt his blood run cold, and not from the weather. "How many?" "Can't tell for sure in this snow, but I count at least 4 figures. They're moving in tactical formation, and they know exactly where they're going despite the weather." The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just operating in these conditions. They were thriving in them, while his highly trained SEALs were fighting for survival. The Taliban fighters were moving with purpose and confidence through terrain that should have been impassable. "Could be locals," Tank suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Maybe herders or something." "Strapped?" Chen shook his head. "No, sir. These guys are armed and moving with military precision." They're heading directly for our planned route to the ridge. It's like they know exactly where we're going. The possibility that their mission had been compromised sent a chill through Morrison that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If the enemy knew they were coming, if this whole operation had been a setup, then his team wasn't just fighting the weather, they were walking into a trap. Rodriguez worked frantically with their communication equipment, trying every frequency and emergency channel he could think of. The radio crackled with static, occasionally picking up fragments of what might have been voices, but nothing coherent enough to establish contact with their base. "Wait," Rodriguez said suddenly, pressing his headphones tighter against his ears. "I'm getting something. It's faint, but it's definitely military traffic." The team gathered around as Rodriguez fine-tuned the signal. Through the static and interference, they could make out fragments of radio chatter. What they heard made their situation even more desperate. End. Contact lost with Bravo team. No response for 18 hours. Search and rescue operations suspended due to weather. All units advised that mountain operations are 80-day. CROM, considered non-viable until storm passes. The message was clear. They were on their own. No one was coming to get them. And no one even knew exactly where they were. The storm that had trapped them had also made any rescue attempt impossible. Williams checked Johnson's pulse and found it weak and rapid. The demolitions expert was sliding deeper into hypothermia, and without immediate medical attention, he might not survive another hour in these conditions. The corpsman looked at Morrison and shook his head grimly. "We can't stay here," Morrison announced to his team. "Johnson needs medical attention, and those fighters Chen spotted aren't going to wait for the weather to clear. We push for the ridge, but we go ready for contact." As they prepared to move out again, Chen made another observation that would prove crucial. "Commander, there's something else up there. I keep catching glimpses of it through my scope, but every time I try to focus on it, it disappears. It's like there's someone else on that ridge, someone who doesn't want to be seen." "Another Taliban unit?" Morrison asked. "I don't think so. The movement pattern is different. Whoever it is, they're not moving with the others. They're staying back, watching. And, sir..." Chen paused, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I don't think the Taliban fighters can see them either." The mystery deepened as they resumed their climb. The storm continued to rage around them. But now they had the added worry of enemy forces above and the strange presence that Chen had detected. Morrison's mind raced through possibilities, but none of them made sense. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and the cold more intense. Every breath was a struggle, and every step required tremendous effort. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death and the hope that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to survive this frozen hell. Unknown to them, high above on the ridge, a figure watched their progress through a scope far more advanced than anything Chen carried. The watcher had been tracking both the SEALs and the Taliban fighters, waiting for the right moment to act. The storm provided perfect cover, and soon it would be time to even the odds in this deadly game of survival. The attack came without warning, erupting from the white chaos like lightning from a clear sky. Morrison's team was still 200 meters from the ridge when the first shots cracked through the howling wind. Chen, who had been scanning ahead with his scope, suddenly dropped behind a boulder as bullets whined off the rocks around him. "Contact front," Tank bellowed, his voice barely audible over the storm. The big sergeant was already returning fire, his M4 carbine spitting flame into the swirling snow. The muzzle flashes looked like angry fireflies dancing in the blizzard, and the sharp crack of rifle fire mixed with the wind to create a symphony of violence. Morrison dove for cover, his mind automatically shifting into combat mode despite the extreme conditions. Through the snow, he could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions along the ridge above them. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ambush site perfectly, using the storm and the high ground to devastating advantage. "Williams, get Johnson behind that rock cluster," Morrison shouted. The corpsman was already moving, half carrying, half dragging the hypothermic demolitions expert to whatever cover he could find. Johnson was barely conscious now, his body shutting down from the cold even as bullets flew around them. Rodriguez crawled to Morrison's position, his radio still strapped to his back despite the chaos. "Sir, we're cut off from any retreat route. They've got us pinned against the cliff face." Morrison assessed their tactical situation with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive through countless firefights. It was bad, worse than bad. The enemy held the high ground, had superior numbers, and knew the terrain. His team was exhausted, suffering from exposure, and had limited ammunition for a prolonged engagement. But SEALs didn't give up, and Morrison wasn't about to start now. "Chen," he called out to his sniper, "I need eyes on their positions. How many shooters do you count?" Chen, pressed against a large boulder with his rifle ready, peered through his scope during brief lulls in the enemy fire. "I count 8 confirmed positions. Sir, they're spread across about a 100-meter front along the ridge, but something's not right." His words were cut off as a fresh volley of bullets sparked off the rocks around them. The Taliban fighters were using the storm to mask their movements, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the swirling snow. Every time the SEALs tried to return effective fire, their targets would vanish into the white chaos. Tank had found a good firing position behind a fallen tree and was methodically engaging targets as they presented themselves. His years of hunting experience served him well as he waited patiently for clear shots through the blowing snow. "Got one," he called out as a Taliban fighter tumbled from his position on the ridge. But for every enemy combatant they eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. Morrison realized with growing dread that they weren't just facing a patrol or a small unit. This was a significant force, probably the security element for the Ghost himself. Williams worked frantically to stabilize Johnson while bullets flew overhead. The corpsman had dragged the unconscious demolitions expert behind a cluster of rocks that offered some protection. But he needed more time and better conditions to treat the severe hypothermia. "Commander," Williams shouted, "Johnson's pulse is getting weaker. I need to get him warm now, or we're going to lose him." The tactical situation was becoming impossible. They couldn't advance because of the enemy fire from above. They couldn't retreat because the Taliban had cut off their escape route, and they couldn't stay put because Johnson would die from exposure. Morrison had faced desperate situations before, but never anything quite like this combination of combat and environmental hazards. That's when Chen made the observation that would change everything. "Sir," the young sniper called out, his voice tight with confusion. "Something's happening up there. The enemy fire is shifting. It's like they're taking fire from somewhere else." Morrison strained to see through the storm, trying to make sense of what Chen was reporting. Through the swirling snow, he could see the muzzle flashes from the Taliban positions, but now they seemed to be firing in multiple directions. Some shots were still coming toward his team, but others were aimed higher up the ridge, at targets Morrison couldn't see. "There's someone else up there," Chen continued, his scope trained on the ridge. "I can see the enemy fighters repositioning, like they're under attack from above. But I can't see who's shooting at them." Tank paused in his own firing, listening to the rhythm of the gunfire above. His experienced ear could distinguish between different weapons, and what he was hearing didn't make sense. "Commander, those aren't AK-47 seconds anymore. I'm hearing precision rifle fire. Single shots. Very deliberate. That's sniper fire, and it's not coming from our guys." The mystery deepened when Rodriguez picked up radio chatter on his equipment. The signals were weak and broken by static, but they were definitely communications between the Taliban fighters above. Rodriguez had learned enough Pashto during his deployment to understand fragments of what he was hearing. "Sir, they're talking about a white ghost on the high ridge. They sound scared. Really scared. They're saying someone's picking them off one by one, but they can't see who's doing it." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The idea that there was another player in this deadly game, someone who could move unseen through the storm and eliminate enemy fighters with surgical precision, was both hopeful and terrifying. Were they being rescued by friendly forces, or had they stumbled into the middle of someone else's war? The enemy fire began to slacken as the Taliban fighters found themselves caught between Morrison's team below and the mysterious sniper above. Through his scope, Chen watched as several enemy positions went silent, their occupants apparently eliminated by the unseen marksman. "Whoever's up there is good," Chen reported with professional admiration. I mean really good. These shots are coming through a blizzard at extreme range, and every one is finding its target. Williams looked up from treating Johnson. I don't care who it is, he said grimly. Johnson's core temperature is critically low. If this firefight doesn't end soon, he's going to die regardless of who wins. Morrison made a decision that went against every instinct he had developed in over a decade of special operations. Instead of trying to identify and engage this new element, he decided to use it to his advantage. All teams, shift fire to support whoever's helping us, he ordered. Target any Taliban position that's still active. We use this opportunity to break out of this kill zone. As his team adjusted their fire, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by more than just enemy fighters. Somewhere high above them, in the swirling white chaos of the storm, was someone with skills that matched or exceeded those of the best snipers he had ever worked with. The question was, who were they, and what did they want? The tide of battle shifted dramatically as the mysterious sniper continued to eliminate Taliban fighters with methodical precision. Morrison watched through the swirling snow as enemy positions fell silent one by one, the occupants taken out by shots that seemed to come from nowhere. The remaining Taliban fighters were clearly panicked, their disciplined ambush dissolving into chaos as they tried to identify and engage an enemy they couldn't see. This is our chance, Morrison told his team. We move now while they're distracted. Tank laid down covering fire as Chen and Rodriguez helped Williams carry the unconscious Johnson toward a more defensible position higher up the slope. The storm that had been their enemy was now their ally, concealing their movement from the remaining Taliban fighters who were focused on the threat from above. As they advanced, Chen kept his scope trained on the ridge, trying to catch a glimpse of their mysterious benefactor. What he saw defied belief. Through brief clearings in the storm, he caught fleeting impressions of a figure moving across the high ridge with impossible speed and stealth. The person seemed to appear and disappear at will, using the terrain and weather with a skill that bordered on supernatural. Commander, Chen whispered as they took cover behind a large boulder. I don't think whoever's helping us is entirely human. Morrison looked at his young sniper with concern. Extreme cold and stress could cause hallucinations, and he wondered if Chen was beginning to suffer from exposure-induced delirium. What do you mean? The movement patterns don't match any human I've ever seen. The shots are coming from positions that would be impossible to reach in these conditions. And the accuracy is beyond anything I've witnessed. I'm watching through my scope, and I swear this person is moving across terrain that should be impassable. Tank, who had been listening while maintaining security, added his own observations. I've been tracking the sound of the shots. And Chen's right. The firing positions are shifting too quickly. Even the best special ops sniper couldn't move that fast across this terrain in these conditions. Williams, who was working to stabilize Johnson's condition using their combined body heat and emergency warming packs, looked up with concern. Guys, extreme cold can cause hallucinations and paranoid thoughts. We need to focus on what's real and what we can verify. But Rodriguez, who had been monitoring enemy communications, had information that supported Chen's observations. Sir, the Taliban fighters are talking about the White Death and the Mountain Spirit. They're not just scared, they're terrified. These are hardened fighters who've been operating in these mountains for years, and they're talking about something that doesn't fit any normal combat scenario. As if to punctuate Rodriguez's words, another Taliban fighter cried out in the distance, his voice carrying across the mountain despite the wind. The cry was cut short by the sharp crack of a rifle, followed by an ominous silence. Morrison found himself in the surreal position of being grateful for help he couldn't understand or explain. Whatever was happening on the ridge above them, it was allowing his team to survive a situation that should have been hopeless. But the tactical situation was still precarious, and Johnson's condition continued to deteriorate. We need to reach that ridge, Morrison decided. If there's friendly forces up there, we need to make contact. If there's not. He let the sentence hang, not wanting to voice his concerns about what they might find. The climb to the ridge took another hour, with the team moving carefully through terrain made treacherous by ice and loose rock. The storm continued to rage, but the enemy fire had stopped completely. When they finally reached the ridge line, they found something that chilled them more than the mountain air. Scattered across the rocky terrain were the bodies of the Taliban fighters who had ambushed them. But these weren't ordinary combat casualties. Each man had been killed by a single, precisely placed shot, and the positions of the bodies suggested they had been eliminated in sequence, as if the shooter had moved among them like a ghost. "Jesus," Tank whispered, examining the nearest body. "The shot placement is perfect. Whoever did this is the best marksman I've ever seen evidence of." Chen was scanning the area with his scope, looking for any sign of their mysterious ally. "There," he said suddenly, pointing toward a high outcropping about 300 meters away. "I can see someone up there." Through his scope, Chen could make out a figure positioned behind a natural rock formation. The person was dressed in white camouflage that blended perfectly with the snow, and even with his advanced optics, Chen could barely distinguish the sniper from the surrounding terrain. "Should we try to make contact?" Rodriguez asked, readying his radio equipment. Before Morrison could answer, the figure on the high ridge stood up and began moving toward them. What happened next would be burned into their memories forever. The person moved across the treacherous, ice-covered terrain with fluid grace, covering ground that should have taken careful minutes of climbing in what seemed like seconds. As the figure approached, the SEALs could see more details. The sniper was tall and lean, moving with the economy of motion that spoke of years of experience in mountain warfare. But there was something unsettling about the way the person seemed to flow across the landscape, as if the normal rules of physics didn't apply. When the mysterious sniper was about 50 meters away, Morrison called out, "Identify yourself. Are you friendly forces?" The figure stopped and slowly raised a hand in what could have been a peaceful gesture. Then, in accented but clear English, came a voice that seemed to carry despite the wind. "I am Yuki Tanaka, former Japanese Self-Defense Forces mountain warfare specialist. I have been tracking the man you call the Ghost for 3 months." The revelation hit the SEALs like a physical blow. A Japanese soldier, operating alone in the Afghan mountains, who had somehow managed to survive in conditions that were killing them despite all their training and equipment. Morrison's mind raced with questions, but survival took precedence over curiosity. "We have a man down," Morrison called back. "Severe hypothermia. Do you have shelter nearby?" Yuki nodded and gestured toward a hidden cleft in the rocks that the SEALs hadn't noticed. "There is a cave system. Warm, dry, defensible. Your man will survive if we move him now." As they followed their unexpected savior toward the concealed entrance, Williams whispered to Morrison, "Commander, I don't know what's going on here, but Johnson's pulse is stabilizing. Just being out of the wind is helping." Morrison nodded, but his mind was focused on the larger questions. Who was this Yuki Tanaka, and what was a Japanese soldier doing operating alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth? More importantly, could they trust him? The entrance to the cave was so well concealed that they would have walked past it without noticing. Inside, they found a surprisingly comfortable shelter, complete with sleeping areas, supplies, and most importantly, a small heating source that didn't produce visible smoke. As Williams worked to treat Johnson in the warm, dry environment, Morrison studied their rescuer. Yuki Tanaka appeared to be in his 40s, with the lean build and weathered features of someone who had spent years in harsh conditions. His equipment was a mixture of advanced military gear and traditional mountain climbing tools, all perfectly maintained despite the extreme environment. "You said you've been tracking the Ghost," Morrison began carefully. "What's your interest in him?" Yuki's eyes, which seemed to reflect an inner intensity despite his calm demeanor, met Morrison's gaze. "He killed my team 6 months ago. I am the only survivor. I have been waiting for the right opportunity for revenge." The cave was warm and dry, a welcome refuge from the storm that continued to rage outside. As Williams worked to stabilize Johnson's condition, Morrison listened to Yuki Tanaka's story with growing amazement and respect. The Japanese soldier spoke in measured tones, his English precise despite his accent. 6 months ago, I was part of a joint training exercise with Afghan Special Forces, Yuki explained as he checked his equipment with methodical precision. "My team was tasked with teaching mountain warfare techniques to local units. The Ghost learned of our presence and saw an opportunity to capture foreign military advisors for propaganda purposes. Morrison nodded, familiar with similar international cooperation missions. What happened to your team? Yuki's expression darkened. The ghost used villagers as bait, claiming they were being held hostage in caves higher up the mountain. When my team moved to rescue them, we walked into an ambush. The villagers were already dead, executed hours before we arrived. My team leader, Sergeant Matsuda, realized it was a trap, but too late. Tank, who had been listening while maintaining security at the cave entrance, turned around. How did you escape? I did not escape, Yuki said simply. I was captured with the others. The ghost kept us alive for 3 days, making propaganda videos. On the third night, there was an avalanche caused by the fighting in an adjacent valley. In the chaos, I broke free and managed to kill 2 guards before fleeing into the mountains. Williams looked up from treating Johnson. You've been surviving alone in these mountains for 6 months? In winter? Yuki smiled grimly. I am from Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan. My family has been mountain guides for generations. These conditions are harsh, but not impossible for someone who knows the old ways of survival. Chen, who had been studying Yuki's rifle, asked the question they were all thinking. That shooting we witnessed today, how did you move so fast between positions? Yuki's eyes showed a hint of amusement. You Americans always think in terms of technology and firepower. Sometimes the old methods are more effective. I know every path, every hiding place, every wind pattern on this mountain. The storm that troubles you is my ally. Rodriguez had been trying to establish radio contact with their base, taking advantage of their improved position in the cave. Commander, I'm getting clearer signals up here. It sounds like the storm is starting to break up at lower altitudes. Morrison felt a surge of hope. If they could re-establish communications, they might be able to call for extraction once the weather cleared. But Yuki's next words brought the harsh reality of their situation back into focus. Your enemy is close, the Japanese soldier said, checking his scope through a crack in the cave entrance. The ghost has been using this storm as cover to move a large force through the valley. The men who ambushed you were just the advance guard. Tank crawled over to join Yuki at the entrance. How large a force are we talking about? I count at least 40 fighters, possibly more. They have been gathering supplies and weapons in preparation for a spring offensive. The ghost believes the storm will keep coalition forces grounded long enough for him to complete his preparations. Morrison assessed their situation with growing concern. Even with Yuki's help, 8 SEALs, one of whom was barely conscious, wouldn't stand much chance against 40 determined Taliban fighters, especially in these conditions. They needed an edge, and they needed it fast. What do you know about their positions and capabilities? Morrison asked Yuki. The Japanese soldier pulled out a hand-drawn map that showed remarkable detail of the local terrain. The ghost has established 3 main positions. A command post in the largest cave system, about 1 kilometer east of here. Supply caches in 2 smaller caves to the north and south. Most of his fighters are positioned to defend the approaches to the command post. Williams reported good news about Johnson. His core temperature is rising, and he's responding to treatment. He's still weak, but he should be mobile in a few hours if we keep him warm. Chen had been studying the terrain through his scope and made an observation. Sir, if Yuki is right about their positions, we might be able to use this storm to our advantage. The visibility is still near 0, and we know the terrain better now thanks to our guide here. Morrison began to formulate a plan that was audacious even by SEAL standards. Yuki, you said you've been planning revenge for 6 months. Do you have intelligence on the ghost's exact location and routine? Yuki nodded. He stays in the main command cave during storms like this. Only his most trusted lieutenants are allowed inside. If we could reach that position. He let the implications hang in the air. Tank grinned despite their dire circumstances. You're thinking what I think you're thinking, aren't you, Commander? Morrison looked at his team. They were exhausted, operating in extreme conditions, cut off from support, and facing overwhelming odds. Under normal circumstances, any sane military commander would focus on survival and extraction. But these weren't normal circumstances, and SEALs weren't known for sanity. Instead of running from the ghost, Morrison said slowly, what if we hunt him? Rodriguez looked up from his radio equipment. Sir, with all due respect, that sounds like suicide. Maybe, Morrison admitted. But think about it. He's not expecting an attack in these conditions. His forces are spread out guarding against approaches from the valley, not from someone crazy enough to attack from higher up the mountain. If we could eliminate the ghost himself, we'd accomplish the mission objective and probably scatter his forces. Yuki's eyes showed approval. In Japanese, we have a concept called Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan. It means to persist in the face of impossible odds, to find victory where others see only defeat. I believe you Americans have a similar concept. Hoo-ya, Tank said quietly, and the others nodded in agreement. Williams finished his assessment of Johnson. He's stable now, but moving him through another storm would be risky. I could stay here with him while the rest of you. No, Morrison said firmly. We don't split up. Johnson comes with us, or we all stay here. As if summoned by their conversation, Johnson's eyes fluttered open. The demolitions expert looked around groggily, his vision slowly focusing on the faces of his teammates. Did somebody say something about not leaving me behind? Johnson asked weakly, his voice hoarse but determined. Morrison knelt beside his wounded teammate. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck full of ice, Johnson admitted. But I can move, and I can fight. Just point me at something that needs blowing up. Williams checked Johnson's pulse and temperature again. His vitals are much better. The warmth and rest have made a huge difference. He should be able to move. But we need to keep him warm. Yuki had been watching this exchange with interest. Your team loyalty reminds me of my lost brothers. Perhaps together we can honor their memory by ending the ghost's reign of terror. Morrison made the decision that would define the next phase of their mission. We do this together, all of us. Yuki, you know the terrain and the enemy positions. We know tactics and teamwork. Between us, we might just pull off the impossible. As they began planning their audacious assault, none of them could have imagined that the ghost himself was watching the storm from his command cave. Completely unaware that his hunters were about to become the hunted, the mountain that had nearly claimed their lives was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would test every skill they possessed. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the cave, the fires of determination burned brighter than any heating source. They had found their purpose in the white hell of the Afghan mountains, and they would see it through to the end. The assault on the ghost's command cave began at dawn, though dawn was barely distinguishable from night in the continuing storm. Morrison's team moved through the white chaos like spirits themselves, following Yuki's expert guidance through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate. The Japanese soldier had spent months mapping every route, every hiding place, every weakness in the ghost's defenses. Johnson, despite his recent brush with hypothermia, insisted on carrying the demolitions for the mission. Williams had rigged a heating pack system inside his jacket to maintain his core temperature, and the demolitions expert moved with grim determination. I've got some payback to deliver, he said quietly as they approached their target. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. While the ghost's forces expected any attack to come from the valley below, Morrison's team would approach from above, using the storm as cover. Yuki had identified a route that would bring them to within 50 meters of the command cave entrance, without being detected by the sentries. Chen took point as they navigated the treacherous path, his sniper skills adapted to close-range reconnaissance. Behind him, Tank carried extra ammunition and served as the team's heavy support. Rodriguez maintained communication security, ensuring their radios remained silent to avoid detection, while Williams monitored Johnson's condition throughout the movement. The approach took 3 hours of careful movement across ice-covered rocks and through narrow passages that Yuki had discovered during his months of surveillance. The storm continued to provide perfect concealment, but it also made every step potentially fatal. One misstep could send a man tumbling hundreds of feet down the mountainside. Target area ahead, Yuki whispered as they reached their final observation point. Through the swirling snow, they could see the cave entrance that served as the ghost's command post. 2 sentries stood guard at the entrance, but their attention was focused on the approaches from below, not above. Morrison studied the target through his scope. The cave mouth was large enough for vehicles, with a natural rock formation that provided excellent protection from aerial attack or artillery, but it also meant there were limited escape routes once they were inside. "Williams, Johnson, you stay here and provide overwatch," Morrison ordered. "If this goes bad, you call for extraction and get out. Rodriguez, you're with the assault team to handle any communications equipment we find." Johnson grabbed Morrison's arm. "Commander, with all due respect, I didn't survive hypothermia just to sit on the sidelines. Those explosives aren't going to set themselves." Morrison looked into his demolitions expert's determined eyes and made a decision that went against his protective instincts. "All right. But Williams monitors your condition throughout. First sign of trouble, you fall back." The assault began with Yuki's precision shooting. From his position 300 meters away, the Japanese sniper eliminated both sentries with shots so quick and quiet that the guards simply collapsed without alerting anyone inside. Chen, watching through his scope, shook his head in amazement at the marksmanship. "Go, go, go," Morrison whispered, and the team moved toward the cave entrance. The interior of the cave was larger than they had expected, with multiple chambers connected by natural passages. They could hear voices deeper inside, speaking in Pashto and Arabic. Rodriguez, monitoring with specialized listening equipment, held up 3 fingers, then 5, indicating he was hearing multiple conversations. Tank took point as they moved deeper into the cave system, his bulk somehow managing to remain silent despite the rocky terrain. Behind him, Chen provided precision backup, while Morrison coordinated the team's movement. Johnson, despite his recent ordeal, moved with the focused intensity of a man who had unfinished business. They found the Ghost in the main chamber, surrounded by maps, communication equipment, and 3 of his lieutenants. The Taliban commander was exactly as described in their intelligence briefings. Tall, bearded, with the confident bearing of a man who had evaded capture for years. He was studying weather reports, apparently planning his next move once the storm passed. Morrison's team had achieved complete surprise. The Ghost and his men were focused on their planning, completely unaware that death had entered their sanctuary. For a moment, Morrison hesitated. The tactical situation was perfect for a clean sweep, but something about the scene bothered him. That hesitation saved their lives. "It's a trap," Yuki's voice crackled through their earpieces. "I count 15 additional fighters moving into position behind you. They knew you were coming." The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. The Ghost hadn't been caught off guard, he had been waiting for them. The storm, the apparent vulnerabilities in his defenses, even their successful approach had all been carefully orchestrated. The Ghost looked up from his maps and smiled coldly. "Welcome, American Navy SEALs. I have been expecting you." The firefight that erupted in the confined space of the cave was unlike anything Morrison had experienced. Muzzle flashes lit up the rocky walls as both sides engaged in close-quarters combat. Tank's heavy firepower proved decisive in the initial exchange, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. "Johnson, bring down the roof," Morrison shouted over the gunfire. The demolitions expert was already moving, placing charges with practiced efficiency despite bullets flying around him. Williams stayed close, providing medical cover and additional firepower. Rodriguez worked frantically with captured communication equipment, trying to call for support. Chen, positioned at the cave entrance, was engaging targets of opportunity when he spotted something that changed everything. "Commander, Yuki's moving in! He's taking out the rear guard!" Through the chaos, Morrison could hear the distinctive crack of Yuki's rifle as the Japanese soldier systematically eliminated the fighters who had been positioned to trap the SEALs. The mysterious mountain warrior was moving through the Taliban positions like a ghost himself, appearing and disappearing in the storm. The Ghost, realizing his trap was collapsing, made a desperate decision. He triggered explosives of his own, bringing down sections of the cave to separate Morrison's team and eliminate the evidence of his operations. "Roof's coming down," Tank bellowed, as rocks began falling around them. Johnson's charges detonated in sequence, creating a controlled collapse that sealed off the main chamber while providing an escape route through a smaller passage. The team moved through billowing dust and falling debris, following Morrison's lead toward what they hoped was safety. They emerged from a hidden cave entrance, 200 meters from their original entry point, to find Yuki waiting for them. The Japanese soldier had eliminated the remaining Taliban fighters and secured their extraction route. In the distance, they could hear helicopters approaching. Rodriguez had managed to establish communication during the chaos. The ghost was dead, buried in his own command cave, along with his lieutenants and his plans for a spring offensive. The mission that had begun as a reconnaissance had ended as one of the most successful special operations strikes in recent memory. As the extraction helicopters landed in a clearing that Yuki had marked with signal flares, Morrison looked at his team. Johnson was weak but standing. Williams was already treating minor injuries. Rodriguez was coordinating with the pilots. Tank was grinning despite exhaustion. And Chen was carefully cleaning his rifle, but it was Yuki who surprised him most. Instead of approaching the helicopters, the Japanese soldier was preparing to disappear back into the mountains. "Aren't you coming with us?" Morrison called out over the rotor noise. Yuki shouldered his pack and rifle, becoming one with the white landscape around him. "My mission is complete. My brothers are avenged. These mountains are my home now." As the helicopters lifted off, Morrison watched through the window as Yuki Tanaka faded into the storm like the phantom he had been throughout their ordeal. The mountain warrior had appeared when they needed him most and vanished when his job was done, leaving behind only questions and the memory of impossible skills in an impossible place. The Christmas whiteout was finally breaking as they flew toward safety, and Morrison realized they had all been changed by their encounter with the mysterious sniper who had emerged from the ridge when they needed him most. In the brutal mountains of Afghanistan, they had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of human capability and the bonds forged in combat.